What's up, psychedelic investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks. Today, we have an absolutely fantastic episode for you. We are going to be comparing and contrasting the two leading companies in the psychedelic medicine space. I am, of course, talking about MindMed and Atai Life Sciences. In order to do this, we have brought on an expert opinion to help us sift through the details, make sure we get everything right. And I am talking about Jason Najum, who is of Microdose.buzz. So Jason, right off the bat, thank you so much for being on our program today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. And why don't you just give us a couple-minute breakdown of who you are and who Microdose.buzz is?
All right. I guess I'll start with myself. I kind of always had a parallel life between writing and the business world. I was in the business community for over a decade, started various little businesses, some bigger, some smaller. And at the same time, I always had a kind of parallel writing career going on. And as the years went on, I kind of shifted my focus from the business world to the writing world, newspapers, magazines, of different stuff. And then about a couple of years ago, I started working with some clean tech startups, one of them a publicly traded company. So I started to kind of shift my writing towards companies that matched not just businesses I wanted to work with, but companies that were doing things that matched my morals and my passions. So I started with clean tech. And then when I came across the psychedelic industry, at the same time, I had also some personal experience with psychedelics therapeutically. So coming across a nascent new industry that matched something that I was passionate and experienced in really seemed like the perfect match. And then I came across Microdose, started working with them. And for the past year or so, I've been really deep in the psychedelic medicine industry. And so switching to Microdose, we are more than just, let's say, a web magazine. We want to be a kind of your guide to the business of psychedelics. So not only news and features and in-depth content about the psychedelic medicine industry, but also kind of a central focal point where you can go and kind of get everything you need and a kind of holistic view of what's happening in the industry. So every month, Microdose runs virtual events, and we've been doing this for over a year. And now with COVID kind of hopefully getting in the clear, we're also getting towards in-person events. So Microdose is crafting itself and building itself and really investing like the time and the money to be the go-to place for the psychedelic medicine industry. So it's been great. And I'm glad to be here with you because you seem to share a similar passion.
For sure. Well, I'm super excited to have you on because even as you were talking there, I could see the parallels between my own history, how I got up here, and your own. And it's very similar, both working in media, startup businesses. And then when it comes to Microdose, I actually participated in one of these events that you were talking about in not your most recent one, but the one before that. I had a lot of fun. It was great. And I'm excited to have you on the channel because when it comes to my own personal research of looking into the different psychedelic medicines companies for doing my videos, a lot of the research I get is from Microdose.buzz. So it's a great resource, and I'm happy to share that with any viewers on my channel. It's a great way to learn about the different companies in this field. So I guess we should just hop right into it. We're going to give right off the bat, I guess we're going to give a little bit of a rundown of each company, and then we're going to get into some specifics, looking at clinical trials, financials, and some other stuff. Whatever happens in our conversation will happen. So I guess I will let you start off, Jason, and could you just give us a brief rundown about who Atai is and what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, Atai, for those who don't know, just went public, started trading on Friday. And they've been around since 2018, kind of in the background as kind of the sleeping psychedelic giants looming in the background. They call themselves a drug development platform, like a biotechnology company pioneering mental health innovation. A lot of the jargon that you'll hear from a lot of psychedelic medicine companies. I guess what sets them apart really is, their founder is one thing that sets them apart. They've kind of got this Elon Musk figure at the head of Christian Angermeyer, and a really deep stable of investors that they've been building over the years, backed by Peter Thiel. and they're kind of entering and they're shaking things up in a way. And MindMed has kind of been the go-to fan favorite and industry leader for a while now. And Atai has finally stepped in, and I think it's going to be a good thing. It's going to kick everybody in the butt a little bit, and we're happy the psychedelic medicine industry is growing. Well, okay, now there's a big boy in town here, and everyone's gonna have to step up their game because Atai seems to be like the real deal.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when you're looking at least the public companies, I know there's some dark horse private companies still out there that could come in, but at least when you're looking at companies that are currently public, and almost no matter how you measure it, whether you're looking at just like bare number of clinical trials, or you're looking at the money in the bank, or the team of scientists you have around them, it really is starting to look like it's shaping up to be a competition between MindMed and Atai Life Sciences. Yes, there's also Compass there, and they're probably going to do well. And then there's a bunch of other companies like Numinous and Cybin, et cetera, that have a good chance, but they just don't seem to quite be on that level of Atai and MindMed yet, which is why we're talking about these two companies, I guess.
Yeah, we're talking about the two big boys.
Exactly. So I guess I'll briefly do a rundown of what MindMed is, what they represent now. So MindMed, they describe themselves, they present themselves as kind of a next generation pharmaceuticals company. And they're aiming to, much like Atai, solve many multiple healthcare crises, mental health care crises that our society is undergoing at the moment. So they're trying to do this through 3 different avenues, I would call it. The first is experiential therapy. So that means like hallucinogenic doses paired with therapy. So say taking LSD and talking to your therapist, trying to integrate some of these emotions that you have. They're also looking at psychedelic inspired medicines. So substances that aren't necessarily psychedelic, but that came from a classic psychedelic originally. So 18MC is a great example of that. It's a derivative of a extremely hallucinogenic drug called ibogaine, but 18MC itself is not hallucinogenic. And then the third kind of avenue they're going through is next generation psychedelics. So this is something that Atai is also doing and investing heavily in, is kind of inventing brand new psychedelics that eliminate some of the problems that our classical psychedelics have. So the prime example is trying to shorten the lifespan of some of these drugs. Like an 8-hour LSD trip is great in some respects, but it poses problems for therapy, having the experience last that long. So something that MindMed is really working hard to do is shorten that lifespan of the LSD, and that's kind of their next generation psychedelics. And then all of this is kind of complemented by digital technologies. So they have their Albert division, and they're trying to create a more personalized medicine, collect better data that will allow for better decisions, and just accelerate and ameliorate clinical trials. So that's kind of my 2-minute MindMed breakdown.
Yeah.
So why don't we get into a little bit of specifics here, a little bit of comparing and contrasting, Jason. And I guess we'll start with what's probably the most important topic to be discussing when comparing and contrasting different companies, which is the science, like what different clinical trials these companies are doing. So could you perhaps talk a little bit about Atai's biggest projects, or what they're most excited about, or what you're most excited about when looking at what Atai is working on?
Yeah, looking at Atai's pipeline. So this is probably the main reason why Atai stepping in, it becomes the immediate competition for MindMed, is because for so long, MindMed was just head and shoulders above everybody else because of the dynamic diversity of their pipeline. And then all of a sudden Atai is in with 10 different divisions working on a bunch of different substances. So, I mean, as an overview, they're quite diverse, very diverse, covering a whole range of compounds, right? From DMT to ibogaine to ketamine to MDMA. So they're covering everything. I will say that MindMed has LSD pretty much to themselves, almost across the industry. So that's something that flags right away. Atai is giving MindMed a run for his money, but LSD seems to be MindMed's. In terms of progress, they're very broad in their attack, but I don't know if people realize how early they are in terms of their clinical trials. Of their 10 subsidiaries, only 2 of them, well, actually only one of them is even in phase 2. And you've got a second one that's starting phase 2 just about now. So they're quite early in terms of the clinical trial process. That could be deemed negative, depending how you're looking at things with the short term or the long term. And specifics that get me excited. Perception Neuroscience is working on a ketamine, an R-ketamine. And it's starting phase 2. And although ketamine is a quite crowded space, it seems that they're doing something a little bit different with a different delivery method and potentially like a rapid acting antidepressant. So the market they're attacking is a big one, unfortunately. It's treatment-resistant depression. And they've signed a deal with Otsuka Japan, which is one of pharmaceutical industry's biggest players and maybe the biggest in neuropsychiatry. And Otsuka's already given them a $20 million advance payment, which means that they're probably onto something. If a big boy is giving them 20 mil up front, there's something there. So that could be an interesting one.
I'm just going to jump in here because this is actually something that I really love that Atai is doing, because all the other companies in the field, MindMed included, basically their only mechanism for raising the tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that they need to run their clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 3 is by diluting their stock and selling more stock and doing capital raises, which is fine. As an investor, I'm aware that that's the main way that they're doing this, and I'm totally okay with that. But when I read about Atai's deal with the Japanese company, that they're essentially selling the rights to use this drug in Japan for, what did you say, $20 million or something?
Just to start.
Yeah.
That's the first payment, yeah.
Really opens up a brand new avenue, at least in terms of like my thinking, for how to raise capital in this space, as opposed to just needing to continuously dilute your shares until you can bring these drugs to market in 5 years. So when I first read about that, when Atai did that like a month or two ago, I was like, a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, oh, this is a different avenue to take. And I really thought that was great.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like a harbinger, like a crystal ball into the future of how we're going to start. I mean, eventually psychedelic medicine startups and big pharma are going to start to merge or blend or work together. It's going to start to happen. And I wonder if that's a model, a future model. Yeah.
I hope so. Cause like we're getting a little off topic here, but it's okay. One of the kind of biggest, not ideas, but kind of expectations, I guess, in this space is that we'll see these companies essentially be bought up by giant pharma companies. Like we'll see the Pfizers and the Johnson & Johnsons just swoop in and buy MindMed, et cetera. And I mean, I guess as a shareholder, I'd be okay with that. But personally, I'd like to see these companies make it on their own and kind of join the big leagues of pharmaceutical companies rather than be absorbed into it, because these players, can't speak for all of them, and I won't name names, but some of them have had some pretty big ethical issues, in my own opinion, over the past. So I'd rather see them make it on their own and solve these other companies' problems rather than join them and try to solve it. But like I said, we're getting a little off topic.
There's a whole other avenue there. So another one, I mean, so Reconify is the next, or should be the first, because they're the furthest along in their clinical trials. They've already started phase 2A. I guess of note is that actually it's a non-psychedelic compound that Reconify is working with, which is another side point of maybe some sort of diversity that Atai brings. So not all of their trials and their developments are focused. It's not only on psychedelics, which some people could find something negative with that, who want a pure psychedelic play. But it does potentially give them some protection if psychedelics run into some roadblocks of legal issues and stuff like that. So Reconify is their most advanced compound right now. A note on the Reconify co-founder was actually a 2013 Nobel laureate in physiology and medicine. Yeah, I came across that. So that's a good sign.
In which field? In chemistry or?
In physiology or medicine. Okay. 2013 Nobel laureate Thomas Sudhoff, co-founder of Reconify Life Sciences.
And he's still there?
Yeah, he's still there.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's still there, which, I mean, that could tie into the structure later on about how Atai, lets their separate entities kind of retain autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a positive and a negative here. It seems to be an interesting development here, although the market they're attacking is for schizophrenia. So their most advanced compound is for a relatively smaller market than, let's say, MindMed's anxiety trial.
Mm-hmm.
So depends how you're looking at things. It's obviously great that we're trying to find a solution for schizophrenia that doesn't really have a lot of medical options for it. But business-wise, their lead compound is addressing a relatively smaller market. So there is that.
I mean, it's a smaller market, but also I'm pretty sure I have this right. I don't think that there is a drug on the market yet that's been shown to be effective to treat this cognitive impairment when it comes to schizophrenia. So even if it's a smaller relative market, if you're the only one that has a solution to it, there's still potentially lots of profit to be made there. Although we're still super early in the process, even though it's the furthest ahead, we're still going to need to wait years to see it make through.
Are we drifting into the speculation zone?
Maybe that's always a good place to be. Yeah, I'll let you continue. Sorry for continuously interrupting.
No, that's fine. I like it. So another one that jumped out was actually, so they've got ibogaine. They've actually got two versions, and they've got an ibogaine derivative. And they're working with DMT and they're working with MDMA, kind of matching MindMed in terms of their pipeline. And these are all really early stage, like preclinical stuff. The majority of their pipeline is preclinical. So in some ways, they're kind of matching MindMed in terms, because MindMed is also working MDMA and these items in the preclinical stage. One that's potentially could be interesting is their GABA therapeutics, which is etifoxine. Etifoxine, what I've come to discover, is already being used in many countries. Like 40 countries have it legalized for treatment for anxiety. So GABA therapeutics is trying to attack generalized anxiety disorder with a drug that's already has precedence as being legally used in many countries, and with some clinical studies kind of backup. So, and they're trying to bring it into the US and countries that don't have it legal yet. So that's potentially something that could get fast tracked, since there's already some kind of a library of evidence and studies there. Again, this one's not psychedelic, but it could be something that gets commercialized potentially faster than the rest of their stuff. So that one popped up on my radar.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, they're just working on so many different things that, like, it's hard not to get excited, rather, when you look at it. It's like, oh, they're working on anxiety, they're working on depression, they're working on different forms of depression, they're working on schizophrenia, mild traumatic brain injury. Like, just their net is so wide that they're casting, trying to solve all these different kind of crippling issues that are both terrible on an individual level, but also in many cases a societal level. Like, I know that Field Trip, a different company in the field, came out with a study recently looking at North American depression levels, and it was off the charts. There was something like 1 in 2 people showed like serious signs or symptoms of depression, which is mind-blowing and like terrifying. So the fact that we have these companies that are working to solve these societal issues is just great. Like, and hopefully they are successful, and all the information so far looks like they are on the right track, but I guess we're going to have to wait, which sucks. That always ends up being the answer. It's like, I guess we're just going to have to wait a couple of years, but
it's moving quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, there's more in their pipeline. I mean, Viridia with their DMT is interesting because it's DMT, which is a very interesting compound. They're going after a big market, unfortunately, with treatment-resistant depression. So it's quite early, but Viridia and their DMT is something else to keep on your radar. We're going to have to, it's so early with so much of their pipeline, so we're going to have to keep coming back and updating things. But they're in summary, their pipeline is really vast and broad, and there's a lot of potential there. So we're going to have to keep checking in, update their trials, and maybe we'll do this again in 6 months and see where we're at.
A lot of fun. I guess I will just briefly go over MindMed's clinical pipeline now. And like I was kind of alluding to earlier, I really like how we have multiple companies that are working on the same problem here. So you mentioned how Atai is going after depression, how they're going after opioid use disorder, how they're going after anxiety. And when we take a look at MindMed's pipeline, we also see the same issues are being tackled, but often with different drugs or different solutions or potential solutions. So if we just start with looking at addiction, opioid use disorder. So we have on MindMed side, they're working with a drug called 18MC, which is set to enter phase 2 trials, hopefully very soon. They say in Q3, although they've been kind of pushing the start date of this back every few months for the last like half year. So hopefully once we get to the end of Q3, this trial will have actually begun. But yeah, 18MC is actually a derivative of ibogaine. So they're working on a similar, although a little bit different compound than Atai Life Sciences. But something that really sticks out to me when we're talking about how MindMed is attempting to solve the opioid use disorder crisis is they're looking, at least in my opinion, they're looking at this problem in a very holistic manner. So yes, they do have their program that is trying to treat people who are already addicted to opioids with LSD or with 18MC, excuse me. But they're also trying to solve the root cause of addiction itself. So they sat down, they looked at the data and they said, how are people getting addicted to opioids in the first place? Because the best way to solve the opioid addiction crisis is to ensure that people don't get addicted to it in the first place. And one of the things that they saw is many people, they go to their doctor with chronic pain issues, and then they get prescribed opioids from their doctor to treat their unmet needs, their chronic pain, and they get addicted to those opioids. So one of the things MindMed is working on is a program called Project Angie, which is pain treatment, because they figure if they can treat the pain that ultimately leads to the opioid crisis, then they can kind of circumvent that in the first place. So they're using LSD to treat pain in or therapeutic settings, I believe, in the first place, or larger doses, excuse me, although they're also experimenting with smaller doses. And one of the programs that they're currently studying, which they have a phase 2 trial for, is treating suicide headaches. So a very specific type of pain, treating suicide headaches with LSD, and that's in phase 2 trials, although that's going to take a few years apparently for these phase 2 trials to wrap up. But I just really like here how they're trying to attack the problem from multiple angles. So people that are currently addicted to opioids, how do we treat them? Well, let's try this ibogaine derivative, 18MC. But then also, how can we make sure more people don't get addicted to opioids in the first place? And they're using LSD to treat the chronic pain that people feel, which I find is just really cool. And like personally, like I'm not a scientist. I don't know whose compound is going to be better, whether it's going to be regular ibogaine, no ibogaine, 18MC. There's also some other dark horse contenders that other companies are working on, derivatives of ibogaine. And like, I don't know which one's going to be best, but I like how there's so many different options on the table, different people testing different solutions, because maybe they'll all work, but some will work better. So I just really like how we have that competition. And then just quickly going through the rest of their pipeline, their kind of flagship program is Project Lucy, which is using LSD in an experiential setting to treat anxiety. So that's moving into phase 2B trials, I believe, by the end of this year. They wrapped up their phase 2A trials. So that's really their flagship program. And in many cases, their most exciting program. I personally am more excited about the opioid addiction potential, but that's their Project Lucy LSD for anxiety is their flagship program. They're also working on LSD microdoses, so for ADHD and then just in general. That's Project Flow, and that's set to enter phase 2 trials also soon, later this year, hopefully very soon. And then they've got a plethora of multiple phase 1 trials. So they're looking at DMT like Atai is, MDMA. They're mixing LSD and MDMA, and they're just working in all sorts of different kind of discovery settings, trying to figure out the base science behind what works and what doesn't work. And that's also what Atai is doing in a lot of these cases. So I really love how the different companies are working on so many different solutions. It does get me very excited for both companies.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of something you mentioned kind of maybe gets us too early to the segue of the how they differentiate in terms of structure. But I mean, the fact that MindMed is a single kind of structure and Atai has their different divisions, it maybe allows MindMed to have this vision of what they want to do and to go for it. And there's kind of perhaps more of a singular vision possible. with a setup as like MindMed. I'm not sure if you want to jump to that
Sure.
category since I just segued us there.
Perfect. So I guess just very briefly, just explain for anybody who might not be aware. So like you said, Atai kind of operates differently than MindMed in the sense that they're almost like, I don't want to say they're an investment firm, but what they do is they buy up all these different psychedelic medicines companies, or in some cases, not psychedelic medicines companies, just pharmaceuticals companies. And they have all these different companies that are all working on their own solutions to different problems under the Atai umbrella. So what I've been calling them on my channel a lot is an umbrella organization, because they have all these different companies that all fall within the Atai family. And if one company has a breakthrough, then it can be shared with the other companies, but they're not necessarily all under the same roof like MindMed is, as you were saying. So I guess my question for you would be, how do you think that these two different structures would affect the chances of success for the different companies? Because I personally am going back and forth. I don't know which one I like more. I can see that there's benefits and cons to each one. So what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons, it seems like. Actually, a thought that popped to my head as I was reading through all this was, kind of reminds me of the libertarian view versus the big government model.
Okay.
Right. So Atai is kind of the libertarians of this structure, where they're able to share maybe the legal department and some clinical trial expertise, but kind of like leave us alone. It's more efficient if you leave us alone working by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's one of the potential pros, is that allows for like autonomy and efficient decision making made by the people who are on the ground with the expertise, but they still kind of get the bigger potentially like logistical support from Atai, or they can share it, right? So they're able to share resources and information while letting the experts do what they do. And in the startup phase, a lot of kind of founders, and the founders are often scientists. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden they got to start worrying about, and going public, or legal briefs, or marketing and stuff like that. And kind of Atai removes some of that extra work that's not in their wheelhouse off the table, and they could focus on the drug development. So
it's also nice to have that $400 million in the bank.
It's not bad. Yeah, right? Like, we're running out of cash. So there is that. There's also potentially some extra motivation there. So people who, under the MindMed model, everyone's just under MindMed. I'm sure people who are involved in the early stages of a startup are given shares. They'd be given shares of MindMed. But on the Atai model, you're working on your company still. Mm-hmm. And you can't really like rest on somebody else's laurels. You got to perform for yourself still. So there's maybe potentially some extra motivation there. You still gotta perform. You can't float on any sort of greater success that MindMed may have. So there's another potential kick in the butt there.
For sure. I don't know which one is necessarily better, but one of the things that has really been ingrained in me when listening to Elon Musk talk about creating companies is, when you're creating the base structure, the underlying structure that your company follows, it's important to create feedback loops and incentives for progress. So it's just interesting seeing two different companies that have very different structures, how that will influence the ultimate outcome. Who structured their company better to create this feedback loop, this incentive loop to march towards progress and march towards progress quickly. Like I said, I don't know which one is better, but it's interesting to see the competition, not only in products, but also business models.
Yeah. MindMed may give this kind of more abstract feeling of part of the family under the MindMed banner. And I wonder how much of a motivator that could be, Sure. Is Atai going to be a colder place to work at? Less under the same banner, going for the same thing, We'll see how that kind of unfolds over time, of it being this dispersed. A couple of other small, potentially interesting points about Atai's structure is there's maybe some liability protection of, once we get into actually selling drugs out into the public. If, something goes wrong with one of their subsidiaries, the Atai may not be as affected as, for example, if something went wrong with one of MindMed's.
That's super interesting. I've never thought of that before. That's fantastic point, Jason.
Thank you. So what else they got there? That's about it. I mean, like I mentioned, there's negatives about, we're still going to play it about it being under the same family. I wonder how much of that effect is going to be, you know, being wearing the MindMed jersey, which it ties into also maybe of JR Ron leaving. Do we lose some of that? Because then it switches. Atai kind of still has their Elon Musk figure at the top, and MindMed kind of just lost theirs potentially. So we got to see how that plays out over time. But Atai still has their kind of figurehead leader, kind of an interesting character who's really passionate about the space, and MindMed's kind of just lost theirs. Although it may be a good thing in the long run for them, which I think it may be. Yeah, exactly.
Fingers crossed. Alrighty. So why don't we shift gears here and take a look at comparing the two different companies' financials? Do you want to start for Atai? You can talk about their market cap, cash on hand, burn rate, anything like that.
I'll let you. My mouth's getting a bit dry. You can go ahead.
Perfect. So I guess, starting looking at MindMed, one of the things I always talk about on this channel is that when you're looking at these kind of early stage companies, the most important financial numbers to look at are the amount of cash on hand that they have, because these clinical trials are expensive. Like I read somewhere that taking something from phase 1, getting it through phase 2A, 2B, 3, and all the different FDA paperwork that needs to be done, it can cost sometimes upwards of $100 million. So companies that don't have the moolah in the bank, it doesn't matter how fantastic your words are. You can say like, we're going to solve problem X, solve problem Y. But if you don't have any money in the bank, then you're not going to get very far. So that's always the kind of first financial metric that I look at personally when looking at a company in this kind of pre-revenue model. So looking at MindMed, they've got about $162 million in the bank, or at least they did as of March. I guess they've probably spent a little bit of that since March. But yeah, so not an insignificant amount. Like they have enough money to sustain themselves at the current rate of spending for several years. Their burn rate, the amount of money they spent in 2020 was $35 million. So I should have done this math beforehand, but just doing it very roughly, that is like 5 years, I think, maybe 4 years, that they have enough money in the bank to sustain themselves. Although, of course, the amount that they spend or the rate at which they spend is going to increase.
Yeah.
And then finally, just taking a look at the last kind of important metric, the 3 top important metrics: cash in hand, burn rate, and then also the market cap, because that tells you how cheaply they can raise capital in the future. So MindMed has around a $1 billion market cap. I think I looked at it this morning and it dropped a little bit below that. By the way, all terms I'm giving right now are in American dollars, just to keep it easier. If we have to switch to Canadian dollars, that's cool too. But yeah, so when looking at the 3 most important financial metrics for a company in this space at this time before revenue, cash on hand that they have is around $162 million minus whatever they spent in the last couple months. They're spending this money at around $35 million a year, although this is going to increase. And they've got a market cap around $1 billion. So when they have to raise more money, they can do it fairly cheaply because they do have like a solid market cap.
Yeah. Atai is somewhat similar structure-wise, although now with their market cap. So they're burning through at a quicker rate. But they've also got more cash in the bank. So cash on hand versus what they're burning, they have enough for about 4 years as well. Although we expect that to increase as they proceed from preclinical to actual clinical trials on both ends, MindMed and Atai. So we'll probably have to like revisit this once we see their sheets, once trials are fully up and running on both sides. But it seems relatively, they both have enough money to keep running for like the medium term, which is great. So they're both very healthy. Although at the end of the day, pre-revenue, cash is king, and Atai is just, I mean, it's nuts, right? They're more than double. I think that MindMed maybe is the 3rd place in terms of cash on hand, and then Compass, and then Atai is double Compass. I think they're launching their public life with 440 million cash on hand.
Like yeah, which is insane. That's like, I think it's nearly triple. MindMed's got 162. Atai's got, what did you say, 440? So yeah, basically triple the amount of money that they have, which is insane. And like you said, they're tripling the spending rate of MindMed as well. So like
Mm.
I was trying to figure out, not so successfully, when you get into the nuts and bolts, like how many more scientists Atai has than MindMed, or how many different professional in the pharmaceutical area Atai is currently paying as opposed to MindMed.
Mm.
Because when you're spending triple the money, you would expect that perhaps you have triple the amount of people working on these problems. So that could
Right.
be it. When you just look at the number of clinical trials that you have running, that can maybe obscure the fact that Atai may have much more expertise behind these clinical trials just because they have more money. They can spend more money to get more doctors, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, so we could maybe keep an eye on the rate of progress of their trials and see if this money really is boosting them at a faster rate than MindMed.
For sure.
Yeah.
And their market cap is also triple MindMed, more slightly under triple
Yeah.
MindMed. So like if they need to raise more capital, they can do it at a much cheaper price to the investors. So like in general, I don't know, like personally, I still am ranking MindMed slightly above Atai, but the amount of money that Atai has in the bank makes me think like, maybe in like 1-2 years, we could see, in terms of the progress of the clinical trials and the sheer number of clinical trials, just because they have triple the amount of money, we could see Atai start to power ahead of them.
Yeah, 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 definitely. It's really neck and neck in terms of the overall look of the company, of both companies. I don't know, the cash on hand, if you forced me to choose, I'd have to say that puts Atai slightly ahead, but I've been following MindMed since day one. Full disclosure, I'm a MindMed investor. I've been following them for a year now. So my heart is still kind of on the MindMed team. If this were to be financial advice, which it definitely isn't,
Never financial advice.
never. I mean, the fact that they're neck and neck with each other, and we can barely tell the difference. It's tough to choose, but MindMed's market cap is a third. If you're thinking as a short-term or near-term investor, is MindMed a better deal? Right? So that's kind of that's guess to my final conclusion is they're two great companies doing a lot of great things. They're definitely leading the way. Hopefully they start motivating each other and looking out, kind of like the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, pushing each other towards who's going to be the best. That was a really old reference. Hope it doesn't alienate your audience. But yeah, MindMed with, I don't, is Atai worth 3 times more right now?
I don't know. Like, it's so hard to tell, especially from the outside, like when you don't have that like insider perspective of being able to go and look at the floor, see like, oh, you guys have triple the number of scientists working on that problem. Like, I don't know if that's the case or not, but if that is the case, then maybe it would be worth 3 times more. I just don't know. Personally, I have a lot more in MindMed than I have in Atai, although that's more or less because I got into MindMed so early. I was able to get in at 40 cents, which was like fantastic, blessing that decision every day. But yeah, something else I talk about all the time is how you don't have to choose one. Like if you're a retail investor sitting on the side, like both are great companies. Like if you had the chance to go back to the 90s, late 90s, whenever, and invest in Apple or Microsoft, it's not like you have the choice between early 2000s, maybe. It's not like you have to choose one or the other. If you had to put your money in both, it would have been fantastic. And hopefully we see something similar happen here, how maybe in 10 years, if you put your money in both Atai and MindMed, these are 2 of the leading companies in the future, 10 years from now, in solving some of these problems.
Yeah, at the moment, it seems like it. So, I mean, it seems like a lot of people are not just in it for the money. People care about the space. They care about the work that's being done. At least that's why I'm in it. It seems like that's why you're here. So it doesn't hurt. We don't have to choose. Yeah. Godspeed to both of them.
For sure. And like at the end of the day, personally, this gets into my own investing philosophy. I think that those are going to be the companies that bring the most financial return. Like if a company has as its mission solely to make money, then chances are they're not going to end up making that much money. But if you have a company that has a mission to solve the biggest problems that society faces, and they're driven by that goal of solving these problems and making the world a better place, along the way of that pathway to making the world a better place, they're probably going to make a lot more money than that company that was just started to make money and do nothing else than make money in the first place. And that's kind of stepping away even just from the psychedelic sector and just my investing philosophy in general. Basically, every company that I invest in is working to change the world for the better. And I think that those will be the biggest payoff long term.
Yeah, seems like it. And I agree.
Well, Jason, is there anything else you want to talk about before we close this off? It's ended up being like a long episode. I don't have a timer.
Yeah.
Probably like half an hour or something.
No, I'm good. I mean, there could be more, but we should probably quit while we're ahead. All right.
We'll have you on the channel again, and we can keep this conversation going as new news happens.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming, Jason.
Thanks, James.
Bye-bye.